My name is Laura, I'm 68 years old, and I live in Sedona, a small and peaceful town in the state of Arizona. Life here, with its red landscapes and a calm that soothes me, is a good companion for my days. However, that peace was shaken by something I never imagined I would go through. Stella, my daughter, is getting married. I always knew this day would come, but I never imagined it would be like this. She is 34 now, and since she was little, I have always been there for her. Always. I was the present mother, the mother who did everything to make her happy, to give her the best opportunities, the best education, the best love. I helped pay a large part of the wedding expenses. Of course, I wanted to see her happy, even if that meant helping her realize this big dream, which, as far as I knew, she had dreamed of since she was very young. She and her fiancé were planning everything in Dubai, and I thought it could be a unique experience, something that would mark the beginning of a new phase for her. But then something happened. One afternoon, I opened my email and found a message from Stella. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly didn't expect what was there. The email said, "Mom, if you want to attend the wedding, you can watch it on Google Meet." Haha, that was it. A cold invitation, as if the only way I could be part of that day was through a screen. Such an important event for her, a moment of celebration, and I, her mother, was being treated as a distant spectator. I couldn't believe it. Of course, I knew her life was taking new directions, that she was creating a new family. But being excluded like that, in such an impersonal way, hurt more than anything. And what hurt the most was that, at the same time she was keeping me out, she invited her father to go to Dubai, without even consulting me. He, who was never so present, was now receiving special attention. I took a deep breath before writing my reply. I didn't want to seem out of control nor too sad. I wanted to maintain my dignity. So I wrote, "Of course, enjoy your big day." I closed the computer, feeling an emptiness in my chest. I didn't know how I felt. I was sad, hurt, but I also thought about how I had arrived at this point. How my daughter, whom I had always cared for and given the best of myself, now didn't seem to want my presence. Of all the people in the world, she was treating me this way. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream, but I didn't do any of that. I just accepted it. Deep down, I thought maybe this was best for her. Maybe she was just trying to move forward, to start her own life. I knew that would happen, but not like this. Not with this kind of abandonment. When the next morning came, I already had a heavy heart, but I tried to follow my routine, as if nothing had changed. However, I soon noticed something was different. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Stella was calling me over and over again. I looked at the screen, and my heart started racing. Was she regretting it? Did she want to apologize for something she hadn't done right? I didn't know, but I knew I didn't want to talk to her at that moment. Maybe it was my pride, maybe it was the pain of being left aside, but I didn't answer. I was too busy to pick up, but in reality, I knew the main reason was that I didn't want to give her the chance to hurt me even more. I went through the day, unable to stop thinking about her, about how our relationship seemed to be drifting further and further apart. I had raised her with so much love, and now it seemed that she didn't see me the same way anymore. My daughter was far away, and I was here alone trying to understand all of this. But nothing seemed to make sense. The pain of being treated this way by my own daughter, to whom I had given everything, left me speechless. I wanted to understand. I wanted so badly to understand where things had gone wrong. Where did I fail? Why didn't she want me there, by her side, on the most important day of her life? I didn't know what to do with that ache in my chest. Something that slowly drifts away, yet in the end leaves you completely ungrounded. The pain of no longer being needed, of no longer being that special person for whom your daughter ran to in moments of joy and sorrow. I had been her greatest supporter. I remember, as if it were yesterday when she was little, running around the house with sparkling eyes, arms wide open, eager to show every step she took, every new word she had learned. I was always there with attentive eyes and a heart full of love. And now, everything seemed to slip away. She was in Dubai living her big day, and I was no longer a part of it. My daughter, who used to call me Mama Bear, now saw me as a distant spectator. That invitation over Google Meet, that little LOL, at the end, was all I had of Stella in that moment. The email she sent wasn't just a cold message. It was a clear sign that our relationship had reached a place I had never imagined. I sat for a long time after sending that reply. Those words weren't what I truly felt. I wasn't okay, and I wasn't accepting the situation. But what could I do? She was happy, and somewhere deep inside me, I knew that was the most important thing. I didn't want her to see that I was hurting. I wanted her to be happy, to live that moment with the certainty that, in some way, I was there. I just didn't want to admit that the pain, the chronic pain of no longer being essential in her life, was tearing me apart from the inside. I thought about everything I had done for her, the sacrifices of sometimes putting my own life aside to be available for her. It all seemed irrelevant now. It was as if everything I had done for her, all the gestures of love, were being erased by something greater, something I couldn't understand. And then she called me. It was as if the sound of the phone was a siren ringing in my chest, echoing the feeling that I was about to be invaded by something even deeper. Will she apologize? I wondered, but part of me knew she wouldn't. I knew she was trying in some way to justify herself. Perhaps she wanted me to understand that things had changed, and that I no longer played such a central role in her life. I knew she was building her own life, and that somehow meant she needed more space. But the truth was that I wasn't ready to let go. Not like this. Not in such an impersonal way. I looked at my phone and saw Stella's name on the screen, and my heart raced. The first time she called, I didn't answer. The second time, neither. I didn't know what I would do if I picked up. I was so full of emotions that, if I spoke with her, I didn't know what would come out of my mouth. I didn't know if I would be strong enough not to show all my pain, all my insecurity. So, I chose not to answer. I needed time for myself, to process everything that was happening. But that night was difficult. I looked at the phone and asked myself if I was being weak, if I should answer, if it was the right decision. But the truth was that I was broken. It was hard to even breathe without feeling that lump in my throat. How I longed to turn back time, to have her again as that little girl who came to me with a soul full of love, the girl who always knew I was there for her. I missed that girl. I missed my daughter. In the following days, Stella continued calling me, but I still didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't be an outpouring of pent-up feelings. I wanted to tell her how much it hurt me, how betrayed I felt, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want her to see that in me. I knew that what she was doing, this shift, was part of life. It's what people do when they grow up. They mature and distance themselves. But I wasn't ready to accept it. I wanted more. I wanted to be there. I wanted to play an active part in her life. And then, in the silence of my own emotions, something began to take shape inside me. I realized that, in a way, Stella was pushing me to a place I had never imagined. A place where I had to confront the loneliness that comes with aging. I knew I was growing older, but I had never imagined that this stage of life would force me to rethink everything I had built. For the first time, I found myself having to face the feeling of being cast aside. And it wasn't just the wedding that made me feel this way. It was the gradual distancing, the absence in small things, the little signs that Stella was pulling away, becoming more independent, and in a way drifting from me. What bothered me the most was the fact that, even being so distant, I still felt that my daughter needed me somehow. But it seemed she no longer knew that. At the same time, the weight of this reality hit me hard. I was no longer just dealing with the rejection of an invitation to a wedding, but with the loss of a role I had always been so proud to play in her life. The following days passed slowly, with a strange mixture of emptiness and an urgent need to understand what was happening. I felt as if I were in a place I had never imagined occupying, a place where my daughter no longer needed me, where I was just a spectator, a background figure in the story I had always thought was mine. I spent nights thinking about her, about the moments I watched her grow, the innocent smile she had when she called me to play, to do homework, to hear her stories. I was the center of her world, and she was the center of mine. And now, it seemed she was drifting away, and somehow I was being left behind. I couldn't understand what had happened, but I knew something was wrong. What hurt most was not only being excluded from the wedding, but the fact that suddenly I was no longer the person she sought. I felt replaced by her life, by the new family she was building. Perhaps it was natural, perhaps inevitable, but the hole it left inside me felt larger than I could bear. I sat that afternoon on the porch with a cup of tea in my hands, watching the horizon. The sun was setting, and the Sedona landscape seemed to envelop me, as it always did. The red rocks, the orange sky, everything felt so serene and yet so distant. I wanted to feel the peace the place offered me, but my heart was restless. I couldn't focus on anything except the pain of seeing my daughter so far away. It was no longer the pain of watching her grow, of seeing her first steps toward independence, but the pain of realizing that the person I had been in her life was disappearing. I no longer knew what my role was there. Throughout my life, I had always given everything I could to Stella. I became who I am because of her. I always put her first, above everything. When she was born, everything in me changed. I stopped being Laura and became a mother. Motherhood was my greatest identity, and it gave me joy, it gave me purpose. When she was little, I was everything she needed. I was her protector, her counselor, her safe haven. As she grew, of course, roles changed, but I was still needed. I still loved her with all my heart, and I knew she loved me too. I thought about everything I had done for her, every sacrifice, every moment I put aside my own desires to ensure she had the best. I remembered sleepless nights, exhausting days, the times I put my own life second, so that she could have the life she dreamed of. And now it seemed all that meant nothing. I don't feel ungrateful, nor do I regret doing it. I did it because I wanted to, because it was my duty as a mother. But what I hadn't imagined was that a mother's love, so intense and unconditional, could become something so lonely over time. When I sat down to write emails to her, to reply to her messages, I felt that everything I wanted to say could not be said. The words felt so small compared to what I truly felt. I wanted to tell her how hurt I was, how suffocated I felt by the pain of being excluded, by the pain of realizing that, in her eyes, I was no longer necessary. But I couldn't. I didn't want her to see me as someone seeking attention, as someone playing the victim. I didn't want to be that mother. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be understanding. I knew she was starting her own life, with new responsibilities, new loves, and new priorities. I knew it was the natural cycle of life, but that didn't make the pain any less. Sometimes I catch myself wondering where things began to change. When did she start to drift away? When did she begin to see her father more than me, even after so many years of separation? Was it when she went to college and started building her own life? Or was it when she fell in love and attention began to shift toward this new person? I know she has always been very independent, but perhaps I was too blind to notice the small changes over the years. I tried not to think too much about it, but the pain was constant. It was there, hammering in my head, keeping me from resting. I didn't know what else I could do. What more could I give her? What more did she need from me that I hadn't already offered? I felt empty, without answers, unsure of the next step to take. When I looked at my life, it seemed that everything had been dedicated to her, and now what was left of me? I felt loneliness so intensely, not just because of Stella's distance, but from realizing that people in general drift away as we grow older. Time ceases to be our ally and becomes an uncontrollable force. Relationships, the ones that truly matter, can weaken, as if time itself had the power to undo everything we have built. What hurt most was seeing that, while I was here, questioning everything I had done and what I could still do, Stella was out there, moving forward, living her life without me. I didn't want to be an obstacle in her life, but at the same time, I didn't want to be forgotten. The feeling of being left behind, like an old book on a dusty shelf, was more painful than anything else. I didn't know how to deal with it, didn't know how to feel in the face of this reality. I felt as if I were living in a nightmare I didn't know how to escape. Every morning I woke up, and the feeling of emptiness invaded me in a different way. The house, which had always been filled with the noise and presence of Stella, now felt cold and silent. I was there, in Sedona, trying to move my life forward, but it seemed as if every piece of me was still in Dubai, in those minutes of pain and discomfort when I read that email. And, as if fate wanted to remind me just how distant I was from my daughter, she began calling me. Not once, not twice. Several times. I looked at my phone screen and saw her name flashing, like a silent scream. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to answer, wanted to know what she had to say, but another part was so wrapped in sadness and indignation that I couldn't find the words. I wasn't prepared to hear what she had to say, if she even truly had something to say. What could she tell me that wasn't already clear to me? The coldness of the email, the distant, emotionless invitation, was all I needed to understand the truth. I was no longer part of her life the way I used to be. She was creating her new reality, and I was not included in it. No longer. But the calls continued. I stared at the phone, my mind torn between the desire to pick up and the need to protect myself. To protect myself from the pain, the frustration, from everything I felt. From everything I couldn't express. I knew that if I answered, the conversation would take a turn I wouldn't be able to control. I was angry, I was hurt, and I feared that the words I spoke wouldn't be the words of a loving mother, but of someone wounded. I didn't want Stella to see me like that. Yet she kept calling, as if something inside her still knew I was somehow there, and she needed some kind of response from me. For a moment, I imagined that she might be regretting it, maybe realizing the hardness of her words, the way my presence had been dismissed, as if it were a choice she could make casually. But maybe I was just deceiving myself, trying to justify the unjustifiable. When the phone rang again, and I saw her name flashing once more, my heart beat faster. I hesitated. I didn't want to be a distant mother, I didn't want to be cold, but at the same time, I didn't want to neglect my own pain. Why should I pretend I was okay when everything inside me was broken? I didn't want to show that I felt rejected, that I felt a pain so deep I could barely breathe. I got up from the chair and walked to the window, looking at the scenery around me. The Sedona Mountains were there, unchanged. They were immune to what I was feeling, immune to the pain of a mother left aside by her own daughter. The phone kept ringing. Finally, I took a step back, took a deep breath, and decided not to answer. I needed time to think, to process everything that was happening. I didn't want to be a mother who surrendered to emotion at any cost, who allowed herself to be dominated by pain. I wanted to be stronger than that. I wanted to be the woman who understood that people change, relationships change, life moves on. But I didn't know how to do it. I knew that if I answered, something inside me might break even more. And I didn't know how much more of this pain I could endure. The day passed, and in the end, all that remained was silence, the echo of the unanswered calls. I thought about writing to her, maybe a short message saying I was busy, that I didn't want to talk right now. But I knew it wouldn't be true. I wasn't just busy. I was lost. Lost in the midst of contradictory feelings. I was afraid of saying something I shouldn't, of letting anger take over me. At the same time, the sadness was there, consuming me. How could it be possible to feel such deep longing for someone who was still alive? How could I feel so distant from my own daughter? She was in Dubai, living her life, and I was here, watching from afar, trying to fit into something I no longer knew what it was. I knew her wedding would be beautiful. I knew Stella was happy. And part of me, even hurt, wanted her to have the happiness she so desired. But the other part of me, the mother part, felt such a void that I didn't know how to fill it. Then I made a decision. I would no longer wait. I would no longer live in expectation of a call that I didn't know would come. I would no longer submit myself to the wait for a response that might never arrive. I would focus on myself. I would try somehow to find something within me that made me feel whole again. In that moment, I decided not to remain trapped in the pain of being left aside. I needed to find myself. I needed to give myself the chance to be happy again, to feel useful, to feel loved, to feel important. Even if it was in a way different from what I had expected. I knew life waited for no one, and that even if my relationship with Stella was changing, my life still had a path to follow. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. I constantly found myself in limbo between anger and longing, between the unconditional love of a mother and the feeling that I was being discarded. With every passing hour, I asked myself, where did things start to change? Where did I lose my place in her life? But there was no clear answer. There wasn't a single moment, a single word that marked the transformation. It was something subtle, a gradual shift that I hadn't noticed until it was too late. Stella's calls continued. She tried to reach me in every possible way, and even though I had decided not to answer anymore, the weight of guilt gnawed at me. Was she truly sorry? Did she just want to talk about the wedding, or was she trying to justify herself in some way? I no longer knew what to expect from her. What did she want from me? Why couldn't she simply accept that my presence as a mother was no longer desired in the same way? It hurt. Sometimes I found myself reflecting on everything I had done for Stella. I had been so deeply involved in her life that I often forgot about myself. Not that I regretted it. No, quite the opposite. Being a mother had always been my greatest joy and my highest purpose. But now I felt adrift, unsure of my place in her life. Perhaps that had been the problem. I had always thought a mother's role was unchanging, that I would always be the person she leaned on, the one she would turn to in times of trouble and triumph. But now, I was beginning to understand that life changes, people change, and even children must eventually leave, in one way or another. Every time I looked at the phone and saw Stella's attempts to reach me, my chest tightened. I wanted to answer. I wanted to hear her voice, even if it was just to sense the indifference I felt in her behavior. But at the same time, something inside me told me I shouldn't. That I needed to protect myself, not let my emotions carry me away in a way that would make me lose control. I knew that if I answered that call, something in me would break even further. It was in one of those moments that I found myself sitting alone at home, staring out the window, lost in my own thoughts, wondering if this pain would ever pass. I began to question, had I been a good mother? Had I done enough? Could I have done more? I had been a present mother, without a doubt. But perhaps at some point I had failed to let Stella go, to let her grow, to allow her to make her own choices without me being so profoundly affected. I began to realize that the problem wasn't only Stella. It was in me. The attachment I still felt for her, the fear of losing her, was what prevented me from moving forward. I had invested so much emotionally in her that I could no longer find a way to rediscover myself without her. And it consumed me. I felt as if I had been placed on a pedestal, where my identity depended on my daughter. And now, with that pedestal crumbling, I didn't know how to react. What should I do now? How should I respond to the indifference I felt from her? How could I accept the reality that she was living her own life, becoming an independent woman, perhaps even stronger and happier than I imagined? Part of me felt proud of that, of course. I had always wanted Stella to be strong and independent. But another part of me, the part that still saw myself as the caring mother, the one who always knew what to do, felt displaced, unsure of how to find a new purpose. One cold morning, as I drank my coffee, I reflected on everything that had happened. My relationship with Stella, the years of dedication, the total devotion. Had I been a good mother? I felt torn between the immense love for her and the pain of being left aside. It was a conflict that consumed me. I knew I should lean on myself, understand that my daughter's life didn't depend on me, but making that transition was hard. I never imagined it would be so difficult to let her go, even if only symbolically. I thought about the words she had said to me years ago when she was still a little girl, about how much she loved me, how much I meant to her. I clung to those words as if they were a lifeline, yet I knew things had changed. Her love for me hadn't disappeared, but it was different now. She had her own life, her own family. She was building herself in a world where I no longer played a central role. I didn't want her to see me as a victim. I didn't want her to think I was trying to manipulate her into coming back to me. I wanted to be strong. I wanted her to know that I understood, that I was giving her space to live. But the pain didn't vanish. The longing, the emptiness, the fear of being left behind, all of it was still there, slowly consuming me. I didn't know how to handle it, but I knew I could no longer ignore it. I could no longer hide from reality. I needed to find a way to move forward, for my own sanity, for my own peace. What troubled me the most was that, amid all this pain, I knew Stella was happy. And that should have been enough, right? As a mother, my greatest wish had always been for her to be happy, to have a full and fulfilling life, far from the limitations and difficulties I had faced. Yet, at the same time, there was something inside me that couldn't help but feel that this happiness was happening without me. As if the space I had occupied for so long in her life was being filled by something, or someone, that was no longer me. I hadn't heard from Stella since her last email, which, in a way, made me feel even more distant. She was there in Dubai, living what I had always known would be the most important day of her life, while I was here in Sedona, feeling a pain that seemed endless. Every corner of my home, every place I looked, reminded me of her. The empty chair at the table, her room still arranged the way she left it when she traveled, the clothes scattered in the laundry basket. Everything was imbued with the memory of a daughter who was now distant. But there was also a truth I knew, and which, perhaps as painful as it was inevitable. I could no longer be the protagonist of her story. Stella was growing, living her life. The pain of separation was real, but it was also part of the natural process. I knew that I, as a mother, couldn't remain tied to the idea that she would always depend on me. She had to follow her own path. And that was hard for me because, as much as I knew this rationally, my heart couldn't keep up. I remember an afternoon when I sat in my garden, a place where I had always found peace. The sun was setting, painting the Sedona sky with warm, welcoming colors. Yet, in that moment, the beauty around me wasn't enough to dissipate the loneliness I felt. I wondered if Stella knew how much I loved her, if she understood what was going on inside me. Did she know that the pain of no longer being an active part of her life cut me like a knife? Did she realize that while she was there, living her dreams in Dubai, I was here, simply trying to find a new purpose for my life? The longing consumed me, and the weight of knowing her wedding was happening without my physical presence was unbearable. Yet, at the same time, I felt powerless. I couldn't force things. I couldn't make her see me the way I saw her when she was a child. Time, that silent enemy, had pulled me away from her without giving me the chance to notice how much she was changing. The idea of being merely a spectator in her life gave me a sense of impotence, a feeling that I no longer had the power to influence her path, to be the mother who had always guided her. It was at that moment of reflection that I began to understand something I hadn't been able to fully accept until then. Her life, like mine, was constantly evolving. What I had thought would be a constant, unchanging relationship with her, as mother and daughter, needed to change. I could no longer cling to the idea that my role was to be central in Stella's life. She was now an adult woman, with her own dreams, her own decisions. I no longer had the right to be a constant presence without realizing that she was creating a space of her own. I knew it was time to find a new path. A path where I was no longer defined solely by my daughter, where I could reconnect with myself. I needed something that was mine alone, something that made me feel complete, without depending on Stella's actions or presence. I knew it would be a painful process, but I also knew it was necessary. And it was at that moment, sitting alone in my garden, that I made an important decision. I could no longer wait for Stella's approval. I couldn't keep seeking in her the validation I should be able to find within myself. I needed to be Laura again, not just Stella's mother, but a woman with her own dreams, her own passions, her own identity. I needed to see myself as a whole person, capable of living a life that didn't depend on my daughter's love or acceptance. Of course, the pain of seeing her so far away didn't disappear immediately. I still felt immense longing for her, still wished to be part of her big day, still wanted to see her happy and close. But at the same time, I began to realize that Stella's happiness no longer had to depend on me. She was already happy on her own, and though this was difficult to accept, it was the truth. I needed to learn to be happy for myself. Gradually, I began seeking new ways to reconnect with myself. I resumed activities that had been put on hold, always delayed because I believed my role as a mother was more important. I returned to painting, something I had always loved but had abandoned when Stella grew up. I started walking more, going out with friends I hadn't seen in years, and participating in community activities. I wasn't doing this to replace Stella's presence, but to discover who I was beyond being a mother. To discover who I was as a woman, as a person, outside of the caregiver role. The pain of not being at her wedding, of not being part of that grand moment, was still there. But the longing I felt gradually transformed into something calmer, more serene. I knew that what Stella had built was a reflection of the love I had always given her, and that, in a way, it was also a victory for me. She was moving forward, and I had to do the same. There was something inside me I didn't want to admit, something that bothered me more than the longing I felt for Stella. It was the silence between us, the emotional distance that seemed to stretch further with each passing day. Her wedding was happening in Dubai, and I was here in Sedona, still trying to understand what had happened. As a mother, as a woman, I still didn't quite know how to navigate this new role that life was forcing me to take on. In the days following that decision to start reconnecting with myself, something inside me began to change. I knew the healing process would be long, but I felt that I was slowly starting to free myself from the pain of abandonment. Yet there was still something I couldn't let go of. The need to express myself, to write, to release everything I had been holding inside. And so it was, one autumn morning, as the gentle wind blew through the trees in my garden, that I decided to write a letter to Stella. I didn't really know what to write, nor whether I should actually send the letter. The truth was that I felt an urgent need to communicate with her, to express everything I was feeling, but I also knew that perhaps it was better to keep these words to myself. For some reason, writing brought me a certain relief, a sense that I could connect with her in some way without forcing a conversation or an immediate reaction. I took a blank sheet of paper and began to write, not knowing exactly where it would lead me. My dear Stella, I've been thinking a lot about us over the past few days, about what has happened between us. No, I'm not going to talk about the wedding, nor about how much I miss your presence. I know that you are happy, that you are living your big day, and as difficult as it is for me, that is what matters most. You are creating your own life, your own story, and I am proud of that. But what I cannot help thinking about is the emptiness I feel here. I miss you. I miss our time together, our routines, our conversations. I know this is normal, that you are building your life, and that is good. I didn't want to be a mother who holds you back. I didn't want to be the one who waits for you. But the truth is that your absence, both physical and emotional, leaves me feeling a little lost. I just want you to know how much I love you, how much you have always been my reason for living. I am no longer the mother you seek for everything, I know that. But still, my love for you will never change. I just want you to know that, despite everything, I am still here. Even at a distance, even if I am no longer the central figure in your life. I never imagined that this moment in your life would take me so far from you. But I am learning. I am learning to be the mother of an adult woman, to give you space, to let you fly. I just hope that somewhere, you know that no matter where life takes us, my love for you remains unwavering. With all my love. Mom. I finished the letter and looked at it for a moment, the words on the page feeling more real than I imagined. I didn't know if I would be able to send it. The truth is that even after all these years, I still felt so connected to Stella. I still felt the need to be her mother, to be that constant presence in her life. But something inside me told me that perhaps what she needed now was space. And maybe what I needed was to accept that I had no control over her life, over her choices. The letter went into the drawer, and I never sent it. Not because I didn't want to, but because in some way I knew Stella had to live her own journey without me trying to interfere or, in some way, impose myself. I was writing that letter not for her, but for myself. To understand what I felt, to accept that a mother's love does not mean control, but support, even from a distance. In that moment, I realized that the letter didn't need to be sent for me to feel at peace. It was merely a reflection of my own process of acceptance. I was no longer the mother she sought in every moment. I was no longer the primary source of support. And yet I knew the love I felt for Stella was still there, unconditional, strong, still very present. Keeping that letter was my first step toward moving forward. Because sometimes letting go is also an act of love. Letting go means accepting that my daughter's life is hers, and that what I can do now is hope for her happiness, for her to follow her dreams. And I, in turn, needed to follow mine. I knew it would be difficult. But for the first time in many months, I felt that I was beginning to understand what was necessary to heal my wounds. No longer waiting, no longer clinging to what could have been, but accepting what already was. And as painful as it was, it gave me the freedom to reinvent myself, to find myself again, as a woman, as a person, beyond the role of mother. I didn't exactly know what I expected when I wrote that letter, but something inside me told me that it was part of a process of healing, a process that forced me to look at myself and recognize that my life could no longer revolve around Stella. I needed a new purpose, something that was exclusively mine. And as difficult as it was to accept, part of this new path meant letting go. Letting go of the idea of being the ever-present mother, the person Stella would always return to, the one she would always seek out. I had to let that image fade away. In the first days after writing the letter, I began to focus more on my own life. I started dedicating myself to things I had neglected for so long because of Stella. Painting, something I loved and had abandoned when she was little, was the first thing I returned to. It was no longer an isolated activity, but something that became my refuge, my way of reconnecting with what I felt, without the pressure of being the mother. As I placed the brush on the canvas, I thought of nothing else. Every stroke was a movement of liberation, a way of expressing what was inside me. I also began walking more. Long walks where I could simply listen to the sound of my own steps and breathe deeply, without rush, without expectations. Sedona, with its breathtaking landscapes, seemed to invite me to do so, as if the red mountains and ancient trees understood what I was going through. With each walk, with each step, something inside me was healing, something I didn't even know was wounded. Perhaps it was the feeling that, for so long, I had been erasing myself to be just Stella's mother. Now, I had to be something more, Laura, the woman, the person I had always been before becoming a mother. And as painful as it was at first, over time I began to feel that I was rediscovering my own strength. I also made new friends. Friendships that didn't involve motherhood, that weren't centered on children or family responsibilities. They were friendships that talked about life, the world, dreams, fears. I spoke with women going through similar experiences, who also had children building their own lives and drifting away. They helped me understand that what I was feeling wasn't unique, but part of the process all mothers go through. The transition from being the ever-present, caring mother to being the mother who supports from a distance. There was also a sense of freedom in my new activities. Freedom not only in the sense of doing what I wanted, but also in the sense of being able to look at my life without constantly needing Stella's approval or emotional connection. This didn't mean I loved her any less, but rather that I needed to learn to live my own life, without it being defined by her absence or by my need to always be at her side. Over those months, I began to feel that, in some way, the pain of separation was transforming. Not that the longing had disappeared, or that I had stopped feeling deep sadness for not being by her side on such a special day. But somehow I began to realize that, even though I had been left out of the wedding, my daughter still carried with her what I had given her: love, values, support. She no longer depended on me to be happy, to make decisions, to live her life. And paradoxically, this gave me a certain relief. I knew my pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me as before. I was learning to rediscover myself. I was learning to understand that the love I felt and still feel for Stella doesn't need to be expressed in every action, in every movement. It was unconditional love, the kind that doesn't demand anything in return, the kind that isn't measured by proximity or how often we speak. I was Stella's mother, but I was also Laura. I was also a woman with my own story and my own dreams. And then I began to look to the future differently. No longer in relation to Stella, but in relation to myself. What did I want for myself now? How could I live the next chapter of my life fully, without my daughter's absence defining me? It wasn't a matter of ceasing to be a mother, but of understanding that motherhood wasn't all that I was. I still had so much to live, so much to discover. I began traveling again too. No longer for Stella, but for myself. I had always dreamed of visiting places I never had the chance to explore. I had never been to Italy, for example, and after many years of postponing, I finally decided this was the moment. I didn't need a reason to travel. I no longer needed to justify myself. I had the right to experience these things for myself, without feeling selfish. Through these trips, I began to realize how vast and, in a way, comforting the world was. It was as if each new place I visited helped me discover more about myself. Not that I was forgetting Stella or our history, but I began to understand that my life didn't have to be defined by everything she was experiencing. I also had the right to build a story for myself. Returning to my life, discovering who I was outside of being a mother, was teaching me that love isn't limited. It doesn't require constant presence. It doesn't require physical closeness. My love for Stella was there in my soul, in every moment I lived for her, in every sacrifice made with joy. But I also needed to love myself in a new way. I needed to learn to put myself first, to give myself permission to be happy, regardless of my relationship with her. And so, little by little, I began creating my own path. A path where I no longer had to be the ever-present mother, where I no longer had to feel that my identity was tied solely to being a mother. I was Laura, and Laura also deserved to be happy. Time, as always, passed faster than I imagined. As I rediscovered myself and began to accept that Stella's life was unfolding without my constant involvement, there were moments, small, quiet moments, when the longing for her presence still tightened my chest. Even when I was busy, engaged in my own activities and building my new routine, there was always something inside me that yearned for her. Something I didn't know how to control, a feeling that perhaps, one day, things could be different between us. I didn't want our relationship to become just a distant memory. I didn't want her to look back and see a mother who had withdrawn, who had shrunk into her own world and stopped trying to connect with her. No, that was not what I wanted. I knew that the emotional distance between us was being created by many factors. the natural changes in Stella's life, my own struggle to let go of the idea of being the mother who always sustained her, the pressure of adapting to a new reality. But at the same time, I knew I had to create space for our relationship to evolve. Not in a forced way, but in a way that was authentic for both of us. What touched me still was the fact that I knew Stella was facing her own difficulties. I knew, in a way, that she still needed me, but perhaps in a different way. And that wasn't bad, it wasn't something to lament, but something I needed to learn to accept. I wanted her to know, somehow, that I was here, that I loved her deeply, yet at the same time, I would let her live her life the way she wanted. I wanted her to know that, no matter the distance between us, I would never abandon her emotionally. I knew that eventually Stella and I needed to have a conversation. Not about the wedding, not about the distance that had formed between us, but about us. About how our relationship had changed and how I could find the balance between being a mother and being a woman who also has the right to live her own life. And somewhere that conversation had to happen, even if I didn't know how or when. I found myself thinking about everything life had taught me. How, over time, things transform. How relationships evolve, change form, and in some cases grow distant. It wouldn't be fair to expect Stella to remain in the same place she once was. I knew she was living her life, becoming the woman she always wanted to be. I also wanted that for myself, to be someone with her own story, her own struggles and victories, someone with a future ahead of her. But despite all my efforts to move forward, something inside me still said we needed to reconnect. Not now, perhaps, but someday. I wanted to believe there was a possibility to rebuild our relationship in a new way, more mature, more balanced, where we could both be who we were without the expectations that had previously bound us. One quiet night, while reflecting on everything that had happened, I found myself writing a letter again. This time not to express pain or longing, but to open a door of hope, a door that said, I am here and I still want to be part of your life, but with the space and understanding that our relationship needs now. I understand that things have changed, but I am still your mother, and I love you with all my being. I know we may not be the same people we were before, but I am willing to try something new with you. I didn't know if I should actually send that letter. I didn't want to be intrusive. I didn't want to seem like I was forcing something. But at the same time, I knew that if I didn't try, I would be left with the feeling that I had never given our relationship a chance to resolve itself in a healthier way. After all, life never stands still, and it wouldn't be fair for our relationship to remain trapped in a past moment. I had to allow space for the future to happen. That night, I put the letter in the drawer, just as I had done with the first one, because I knew what really mattered wasn't sending the words to Stella, but knowing that I was ready to start over. I was ready to accept that life has its unexpected turns, and sometimes we need to step back to see things from a new perspective. I was ready to reinvent myself, to be the mother Stella needed now, not the mother I thought she still wanted. I knew my journey was no longer tied to her constant presence, but to the silent, respectful support of a mother who had become an independent, complete woman. If Stella ever wants to resume the conversation, if she ever wants our relationship to be rebuilt in a more mature way, I would be there. But I also knew that my happiness and well-being didn't depend on it. I finally understood that what really mattered was my inner peace, my ability to love myself, and to recognize that life can be welcomed, even with its changes and challenges. And that a mother's love, no matter how intense, doesn't need to be imposing or suffocating. It can be light and free, allowing both mother and daughter to follow their own paths, with respect and understanding. Time, as always, continued its course, and with it came an unexpected calm. I didn't know exactly the moment when everything changed within me, but little by little, the pain transformed into something softer, more accepting. The longing, which once consumed me like a burning flame, became a sweet memory, a feeling that no longer hurt me, but accompanied me like the shadow of my daughter who, no matter how far away, never abandoned me. Those months were a time of transformation, rediscovery, and somehow peace. I learned to love myself in a way that no longer depended on anyone's approval. Life is not made of perfect moments, and our relationship, with its ups and downs, was part of that truth. I knew Stella was in a place where she felt happy, safe, and loved, and that was all I could ever wish for her. But I also learned that love, to be genuine, requires nothing in return. It simply exists as a silent but constant presence. It was then, on a summer afternoon, when the shadows of the trees danced gently across my garden, that I felt there was no longer a reason to keep the words to myself. The letter I had written months ago, which I had decided not to send, no longer seemed merely a way to express the pain of distance. It had become a letter of acceptance, understanding, and mature love, the love of a mother who respects her daughter's freedom. And, most importantly, it reflected the peace I had finally found within myself. I looked at the drawer where the letter was kept and felt something change inside me. I knew that Stella, as an adult, was building her own life, making her own choices. And although I had accepted the new space between us, I also knew that the relationship we had deserved to be renewed, to be real, with all the complexities that arise when two people try to understand each other after so much time apart, separated by silent, imperceptible distances. I decided that, instead of waiting for her to take the initiative, I would take the reins. I would write to Stella again, but no longer with a broken heart or the expectation of an immediate response. I would not write to seek instant reconciliation or to make myself feel less alone. I would write because deep down what I most wanted was for her to know that, even if time separated us physically, our mother-daughter love could continue to exist in a new, more mature form. I took the letter from the drawer. I looked at the words I had written months ago and smiled at myself. They were still true. I still loved my daughter more than anything, but the love I felt for her now was different. It was free. I sat at the table and, pen in hand, added a few words to the letter. I am writing to you not because I expect anything to change, but because what I most desire is for you to know how much I love you, without rush, without pressure. I know our lives have now taken different paths, but I want you to know that I will always be here, cheering for you, loving you, without expecting anything in return, but with an open heart. When I finished writing, I felt a deep peace. This was not a letter of pain, nor a letter of lament. It was a letter of acceptance, a letter that said, without explicitly stating it, I am here and I am well, and you can be too. It was the letter of a mother who knew that the role of caring and protecting never ends, but also knew that this role changes over time, that love transforms as both people grow and become who they need to be. With the letter ready, I placed it in the envelope, wrote Stella's address, and on impulse decided it was time. It was time to take this step. I didn't expect Stella to respond immediately, nor did I expect it to bring a major change. But somehow, I knew that this act represented the final stage of my own healing process. I was finally freeing myself from the weight of needing to always be present, of feeling necessary in a way that had been suffocating me. I loved her deeply, but now I was ready to love her in the freest way possible, without demands. I went to the mailbox and dropped the letter in. The sound of the envelope being sealed and sent off into the wind felt like a metaphor for myself. It was the end of a cycle, the beginning of another. I didn't need an immediate response. I knew Stella's reply would come in her own time, if at all. What mattered most was that, at that moment, I was at peace with myself, with my daughter, and with what had been our journey until then. And so I let the letter go. Not as a request, not as a